Australian police have helped two more members of the visiting Iranian women's football delegation slip their minders to claim asylum in the country, but one of the seven women has changed her mind and decided to go back to Iran, according to the country's interior minister. It was a dramatic conclusion to an episode that has gripped Australia since the Iranian team's first game at the Asian Cup tournament, when they remained silent during their national anthem, which raised fears for their safety. Well, let's get the latest on this story now from France 24's Grégory Plesse, who's standing by in Sydney. Gregory, this is an extraordinary story. Can you just tell us a little bit about the sequence of events that led to all of this?
Yeah, well, actually, it started pretty much at the same time as this Asia's Women's Football Cup. Very soon, members of the Iranian community here in Australia mobilized and organized to make sure that these women could escape their minders. Some of them even went as far as flying from Sydney to the Gold Coast, that's about 1,200 kilometers, to book a hotel room in the same hotel the team was staying during the competition. And they tried in many different ways to get in touch with them, first through social media or messaging apps, but it wasn't really easy, given these women had very limited access to internet. And of course, face-to-face by, casually meeting them in the hotel lobby or at the breakfast buffet in the same hotel. And they started to let them know that, if they wanted, they could claim asylum in Australia, that they would be able to live freely here. And the same community, at the same time, contacted the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Australian Federal Police to tell them that these women were under control, that they were intimidated, and that they needed help. Finally, that's on Monday late afternoon that everything kind of like accelerated. Some journalists from the BBC were actually present in the hotel lobby when the biggest action happened. They noticed that several members of the team were casually chatting with people who later were reported as members of this Iranian community. Surprisingly, their minder at this particular time was not present, and they just walked off through the hotel doors, and just outside was the Australian Federal Police. And that's about 30 minutes later, then some male members of the Iranian team rushed down to the hotel lobby, then later tried to get into the car park, but it was too late. The five first players were already gone. And as you mentioned earlier, today we found out that last night, literally just before boarding their flight back to Iran, two other women were granted asylum, but in the meantime, one of them, a 20-year-old player from the team, actually came back on this decision and said that she wanted to go home, and the Minister for Home Affairs revealed that today in Parliament and explained that before releasing her, they made sure that this was her own decision. Apparently, it was, and later on she contacted the Iranian embassy here in Australia, who picked her up and regrouped her with the rest of the team who went back to Iran.
All right, and tell us a little bit about the reaction to all of this in Australia, either amongst the public or in the press.
Well, as you can imagine, this story has been making every front page of every newspaper here in Australia. This was supposed to be a pretty quiet month. Here, the biggest scheduled event was, the Asia's Women's Football Cup, but it was very quickly overshadowed by the story of these Iranian players trying to flee their country. First, that anthem story, which led then later to this asylum being granted to 6 of them. And one interesting story that I read today was in the Sydney Morning Herald. Some journalists of this very famous newspaper not only were present last night at Sydney Airport when the team took their flight on their way back to Iran, but some of them actually boarded the plane they were on. This first flight was headed to Kuala Lumpur. And they just told what they saw. What they saw was women who once inside the plane and taking their seats started crying for some of them. They also explained that it was nearly impossible to talk to them because those minders were definitely very, very present. The only words they could get from them was that they were just eager to go home and to be with their families again, that Iran was home. And finally, they explained what happened at the arrival in Kuala Lumpur. Well, the team was actually met by the Iranian ambassador himself, along with about 30 other officials. And apparently for lots of them, it clearly meant that that was it, like there was no more chance to escape going back home. I'm pretty sure that among all this crew who decided to not take Australia's offer on asylum, there are some who genuinely just want to go home and are happy to be back in Iran. But some of them are were probably intimidated. Maybe threats were made to their family back home. We'll probably never know, but it's not a totally unlikely scenario.